Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wind Waker Unflooded's official Podcast Unflooded. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Joe Kendrick, and my name, of course, is Alexander, and we're really excited to get into this episode. Joe, say hi to everyone.
Hello, everyone. I'm Joe Kendrick. This is my friend Alexander Lathem, and this is Podcast Unflooded. We have some questions that we've received today we have some other topics we're going to get into. I'm sure if you've seen the title of the video, you know a little bit maybe about the topics we're going to get into. But yeah, I think before then, I think we have some questions that we'd love to kind of tackle that we've gotten from recent videos and from the Wind Waker Discord. So, Alex, what are some of those questions?
Yeah, so I was really happy with Callum's Army's Temple of Time. It looks really beautiful, but I was sort of surprised, not in a bad way. There were a lot of comments mentioning that, the Temple of Time is presumably, it's been destroyed and the Master Sword was placed there in Ocarina, and that the Hyrule Castle in Wind Waker was built on top of it, right? It had not been moved since. And so there were a lot of people who were like, I don't know if the Master Sword should be there. I think some people were even saying that, the idea of the Temple of Time being there itself is just like, do we need another temple? Because the castle's kind of serving that role. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that, because I do have kind of conflicted feelings about it personally.
Yeah, no, I definitely, and I also, I have my own, conflicted feelings, of course, as well, but what I'm not conflicted on is, I guess, what we see at the end of Ocarina of Time in the adult timeline. Let's break it down, let's recap it, let's break it down, because some of this may just be timeline confusion, but, in the adult timeline, when Link travels to the future, we see that Castle Town is destroyed, Hyrule Castle has been destroyed and replaced with Ganon's Tower. And then at the end of the game, Ganon's Tower is also destroyed. But the Temple of Time is intact in Ocarina of Time. And so I don't know, with that in mind, the way that maybe I should do a video breakdown of this, kind of showing the locations and how they match up between games, because it doesn't perfectly line up, and that's the spoiler alert. It doesn't perfectly line up. But my interpretation right now is that the site where Ganon's Tower was in Ocarina of Time, which, Ganon's Tower was destroyed at the end of the game, that's the site of Hyrule Castle. It still has pretty much the same relationship to the rest of the world. If it's not exactly the same, it's that area still for sure. It and Castle Town, were reborn from their own ashes. And I don't know, it's it doesn't perfectly line up, right? And Ganon's Tower was it was over this lake of fire, which could be reborn as the lake that Hyrule Castle is built on. But either way, it's I don't know, I still see the Temple of Time as a separate structure. There are functionality continuances between it and the Hyrule Castle of the Wind Waker. Hyrule Castle in Wind Waker is built like a cathedral, and it houses the Master Sword. But to me, it's I don't know. I see there's a connection between the locations in function, but in function alone, they're still built very differently. And to me, it makes sense that in the wake of the events of Ocarina of Time, the function of the Temple of Time would then be moved to the castle, a new building. But there could still be this old Temple of Time building that existed from the time of Ocarina of Time and is still there near Castle Town. So to me, I don't know, to me, that's my logic, thinking it out.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. And I guess just I think there's a lot of wiggle room personally, because I think there's just details we aren't super certain on, these locations. I think Ganon's Tower is not a bad idea for thinking where Wind Waker's Hyrule Castle was built upon. I like that idea a lot. But I think there's issues with just, we don't know how much time has passed between Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker. I don't think that's ever really been confirmed. And even if, is the king from Ocarina of Time the same king in Wind Waker? I mean, it could have been 20 years, maybe. It could have been 100. It could have been a really long time. It could have been, 1,000 if you wanted to say that. And so I think that is sort of the big question that kind of keeps us from knowing for sure. I like the Temple of Time being somewhere, just because I know the Temple of Time and Ocarina is obviously that gateway between the sacred world and, being able to time travel and, deliver the sages and all that. So it sort of feels like a very like personal sanctum, right, used by heroes and sages and peoples of importance. But I also like to imagine it as like a place of pilgrimage that like many Hylians and Hyruleans would maybe make journeys to pray, you know, and to do some sort of service. So I could totally see the people of Wind Waker like rebuilding the Temple of Time. You know, kind of like Solomon's Temple, maybe. It's just there's some interesting stuff there, and that's where I personally lean. But yeah, I think these were really good. I think these were really good questions. Yeah, and I guess just do you have any more thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess just like to continue that, it's like even if you want to subscribe to the theory that the Temple of Time was rebuilt into Hyrule Castle, like you said, it's like the people would still, I think, want a Temple of Time functionally, and it's just like, yeah, like you said, historically, and we've talked before about this, like there's never just one the church, right? There's so many churches, and I can go, you know, down a street away, there'll be like 5 churches on one block. Like there doesn't need to be only one Temple of Time, and we see this in the games, in the Zelda games themselves. We'll see the Temple of Time in Castletown, in Ocarina of Time, but in Twilight Princess, it's in the middle of the woods near the Deku Tree, kind of. In Breath of the Wild, it's on the Great Plateau. And is this meant to be all the same building, or are these meant to be different Temples of Time? And I think Tears of the Kingdom, like to me, I don't want to say too much because I know people are still playing it, but you know, from the beginning of the game, you see there's another Temple of Time, but it's in name only. So I think like that, it just kind of confirms to me that like, yes, there are multiple Temples of Time, as there are multiple buildings for any church denomination. So to me, it just makes sense when you kind of think about it that way. You know, there doesn't only have to be one. This is a whole world full of people who maybe want to have a place to worship the Triforce. You know, and it doesn't necessarily have to just be the one building that is housing the Triforce. There could be other temples. But yeah, I mean, that's everything I have to say about that.
Yeah. I think those are all just really good points. And I do want to kind of move on to kind of a greater question. We got a question from Wild Calamity. Thank you for the question about, do you see, and I want to get this right. Let me pull the question up.
Yeah, pull the question up.
How do you feel about the idea of an oil industry being in Hyrule Unflooded? And I think that's a really interesting question because it does tie into sort of the larger conversation of what are we going to do with Wind Waker Hyrule's technology levels? Like, how far into its own kind of steam age or industrial revolution is it? I think these are really important questions. I think the idea that we're going to have like a train does imply that there's been some time. It's maybe been a couple decades since the start of this, you know, technological leap and advancement. So I could see like a little rickety Wild West oil outpost somewhere in Gerudo Desert, maybe. I don't know if that's too much on the nose to have one of those, like I said, those Wild West like oil spires. I don't know exactly what they are. Don't get mad at me, folks. But oil wells, that's the word. Boom, I got it. But yeah, what are your thoughts on all that, if I may?
No, great question. I'm definitely like, I'm very flexible as it is right now about like, what do I think, like, how do I think the, how have the Hyruleans so far harnessed energy in their world? You know, have they, are they using coal power, steam power? Are they using wind power, water power, hydro power? And I'm very flexible at this just because the games themselves are very flexible. And I know, Wild Calamity, thank you for your question. I know you've pointed out before about like Wind Waker has photography, right? It even has color photography. This is fairly advanced. I think there's electric lights in Wind Waker as well. I can't confirm this off the top of my head. I feel like a fake fan not knowing that off the top of my head. But I mean, there are several examples even in Wind Waker of, you know, like fairly advanced technological movements. And so I think that like this world before the flood, and like, I mean, it can even be as advanced as you want because of the apocalypse, because of the flood, because there is a setback. So really, no matter how advanced Wind Waker is, you could say it's more advanced in our version of the world because of that, you know. So we could have any advancements we want. So I feel very open to, there could be oil in the world and they could be starting to discover that. You know, there could be straight up electricity. I mean, I do think like the aesthetic of Zelda, like I still want to stay like true to that. Like it has this kind of medieval edge to it, even if it is a world that, has more modern technology. But that's kind of my interpretation of that. But I'm really open to so many things in this world and advances like that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was just checking. I did a very quick Google search, Electric Lights, Wind Waker, and the result I found, very quickly and with a quick glance was they got searchlights, which I think have also appeared in the Four Swords games. And the searchlights in Wind Waker, you see them on Forsaken Fortress.
Right.
And I think when you're infiltrating Hyrule Castle as well, they look kind of mechanical in a sense that they could be powered electrically, but then at the same time, I don't know. You could also maybe say that there's a candle inside there. How exactly searchlights work, I mean, I imagine there's some mirrors involved, but yeah, like, I think there's something there.
There is, yeah. I totally forgot about those searchlights as being mechanical, right? I just remember like the horn and the light coming out, but you're absolutely right. Like that's amplified light in some way, whether it's electric or, could they just be, who knows what kind of lights? Maybe there's just like a firefly in there. Who knows?
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, I guess we've had a really good discussion. I mean, we've almost hit the, I guess, 11-minute mark at this point, recording. That's like almost halfway. Do you want to kind of transfer into another meaty section of the podcast, Joe? Are you ready for that?
I think I'm ready. Yeah. Do you want to introduce this section, or do you want me to? Or
you could go ahead and I'll back you up. You can tag me in.
All right, I'll tag you in. So, y'all, we had such a good time discussing in our last episode of the podcast. We were kind of discussing kind of what would we have wanted a Wind Waker 2 to look like, and so that kind of led us into a discussion of different elements of different ocean games and how Wind Waker, of course, contributed to the genre as well. And so we just wanted to kind of take that and move forward in that conversation, but in a different direction. And instead of just, because we could talk, for hours about like, where do we want the Zelda series to go next? And if it returned to a Wind Waker-like game, what would we want it to do? But I think like kind of taking that and just moving the conversation forward with, I guess, the question of, what is our ideal ocean experience in a game? And just outside of the Zelda franchise even, or within the Zelda franchise, if it went back to it, like what kind of systems, are we interested in? And, just kind of breaking down what is the perfect ocean game experience.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about it because we had a really great conversation during the podcast, and we talked a lot afterwards just about open world ocean games and sort of I think there's a really cool general concepts that, like, when you put your heads to it, you can really start coming up with like really cool ideas. And I wanted to talk about maybe some of those cool ideas. And something I was really thinking about was the idea of an ocean-based open world game that was maybe very pirate themed. I know that's crazy. But the idea of fighting various different factions of enemies in an open world ocean game, maybe various pirate groups, various colonial governments, something heavily based off the Caribbean, perhaps, just all these different islands, all these different great powers coming in. You've got these pirate republics kind of popping up. And I think in particular playing around with like two mechanics, which is the territorial acquisition from defeating enemies at certain places that we see it in the Saints Row games in kind of a more modern setting, as well as in like San Andreas, where you had these missions you can do in certain areas and it would gain you territory for the gang you were in. And I think it made it like a safer place to be in. You weren't attacked as much. You had access to a home base with resources. I think it was a really cool system of progression, basically. And I think that'd be something really cool to play around with, putting the player in the shoes of some young sailor adventurer and basically telling them that if they want to, they could go out and conquer this whole archipelago.
That's really interesting. Yeah. I mean, I like that idea. I like that idea of territory. I've always been interested in games like that. We've talked about before, like games like that have like outpost systems, and I've always been interested in those. And I think like with the open ocean, like where the borders start to get fuzzy as well, I think that'd be a really kind of enthralling experience. I'm curious too about like and maybe you have better examples of this. So I guess maybe I'm gonna ask Alex, just like, are there examples of what I'm talking about before I just jump into like, I wish a game would do this, and then all the comments are gonna be like, well, games do this. I guess what I like about I think about like the Assassin's Creed series has like a lot of those, like that historical element as well. And I think there's so many more directions to go in with that in mind. Like in my family, I have a sailor that goes back a couple of generations. He was a sea captain during the Revolutionary War, and I think that was such an interesting time as well. In that time of America, and there were still questions about like discovering passages into the like the Northwest Passage, right? I think there was still some discussion at that time. Maybe that was a little bit before his time, but there's all these stories I've heard about American seamen, and I think that it would be great to have a game kind of in that.
Yeah. You can't see it, folks, but Catherine just walked along where Joe was, and now she's here. Catherine, hold on. Let me baby hold her for a sec. Joe, do you want to close that thought out by chance?
I guess I'm just asking, like, is there a game that's covered like the naval warfare of like the Revolutionary War? Because cannon fire is like, I've played a couple games with cannon fire between ships, and I mean, just the situations you get in, there's drama there. That's a game right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. The ones I can think about off the top of my head are, I know Total War did a game set in the like Napoleonic War era. And that's a game that's split up between kind of a map, and then you obviously are building armies and fleets, and then they're fighting in real time. It's a real time strategy game. That game had, maps in Europe as well as like the Americas and the Caribbean and like various other locations. So you could do these strategic real time naval battles, which is really fun. And Assassin's Creed 3 took place during the Revolutionary War, and what sort of would soon become Assassin's Creed 4's idea of being sailing based was there are a set of missions where you would, in Assassin's Creed 3, where you'd set out on a ship and you'd fight these, various British, goons, you take them out for the revolution, and those were fun. Yeah, I really enjoyed those, and a lot of people did. And they were so fun that even the developers thought they were really fun, and they said, okay, we're going to make a whole game about this. Set a little bit earlier, obviously, during the golden age of piracy, the fourth one. But yeah, I think that's like a really cool, I think that is a really cool idea, because I guess I'm actually really interested in colonial history and sort of the beginnings of colonization from like, the 1600s until, just before the 1800s, and even a little bit after that, obviously, because America, in the early 1800s is a very new nation still. And I think that would actually be a really good setting for an ocean game, if I may, because I think about, there's still a lot of like untouched wilderness. And so you could have like maybe in your, islands map, you would have places of civilization, so to speak, of towns, and settlements, all these things, villages and whatnot. And then you would have maybe areas that are a little bit more just like there's no human habitation. And whether you want it to be a actual like historical setting, or if you want to add some fantasy to it, I mean, I think the options are limitless, but you can make some really cool, I think, explorable worlds in that setting. And sadly, it's something that I don't think we've seen enough of.
I agree, yeah, and I brought it up, I guess, like because of that, right? And I think just in thinking about what an ocean game can be, and we talked about in the last episode, like for the Zelda series, like I love the Wind Waker, and I think it does so many things right, but there's things it doesn't do. There's envelopes it doesn't push, and envelopes that maybe it didn't have to push. But there's things that, like, if you play that looking for a complete ocean experience, that's not exactly what it is. That's why this is a separate episode. But like there are things that like it almost does. There's things it starts to have. And one of those things is naval combat. That's something I was kind of thinking about after our last episode. Is that like the Wind Waker like does, like I'm really satisfied by its ocean, but its naval combat I feel like did leave something to be desired. To the extent that it makes sense that you could do a game just about that and have like a totally well-rounded experience. But I think that's for several reasons, and like we talked, like before this call, before about like how the Wind Waker's naval combat is kind of segmented from its actual combat systems. There's some crossover, but like the bombs do something completely different. Just like the enemy encounters, there's no crossover between what you can do in your boat really and what you can do on land. There are items you can use in both situations, but they do different things. They have different meaning. It's like, you can't use your sword in the water really. So it's like it's completely retextualized. And I love the combat of the Wind Waker. It's like I wish it could have actually translated to those maritime battles as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would have added like a lot more to the ocean, and I think maybe making it just a bit more seamless, a bit more fluid to have these like ocean encounters, and then from there, maybe expanding those ocean encounters. And I think Assassin's Creed 4 does a pretty good job. Though I know there are instances where I think if you're in combat with your ship, against other ships, you're not allowed to like leave the wheel. I might be misremembering, but I know that's maybe something where it's like, oh, I'm a little stuck here. Like I gotta either run away or fight it out. And I know some other games like Sea of Thieves has it so that like at any point I can stop what I'm doing and stop, pulling the sails or steering the ship. And if I want to grab a gunpowder barrel and try to jump over and board that ship, I can do it. I might get blown up. And I don't know. I'm not necessarily advocating for like the second Wind Waker to do that, even exactly, or even like another ocean open world game. But I do think we've had so little games that focus on an open world ocean, and even still, from Wind Waker to these other ones, I've seen a lot of progress. Like I've seen a lot of growth, and that's why I'm like really fascinated with the idea, because I think there's just still so much more you can do, even with something just like naval combat.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, and especially the exploration aspect, like you said, with the idea of the colonial spin, like especially in interacting with underdeveloped landscapes and that relationship. And I've just started to play Windbound a little bit, and it may start to scratch a lot of itches. I don't know if you've heard of Windbound. That may be another episode discussing that game and what it does with ocean exploration. But I do think for now it's about time to start wrapping up the video. Alex, do you have any closing thoughts?
I don't. I had a really phenomenal time recording this episode, and yeah, it felt like 5 minutes, this conversation, but that's just how it goes, and I really do. I like the length, and I am curious, as always, for y'all to leave comments on thoughts about anything, but also just like, at some point, if there is ever a craving for like, hey, I wouldn't mind these episodes being 10 minutes longer, or even 100 minutes longer. I don't know. Like, I'm just always on the lookout for that feedback and what y'all like, because I know this is a very digestible format. This is a nice 25 minutes. Doesn't take up too much of your time. It's like 2 Saturday morning cartoon episodes. So, yeah, thank y'all for listening. And yeah, I'll hand it over to Joe. Oh my gosh, Joe's camera feed just cut out. Oh my God. We lost the signal. And such is life for Joe, who is actually recording that from underground. God bless our miners. Joe's gone, but I want to wrap this up, folks. Thank y'all so much for watching, and peace and love from us to y'all. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.